Just before we get started here, I wanted to say a few things. It's incredibly hard to start talking about One Piece in any significant way because it's such an enormous series, starting all the way back in 1997 and still going strong with no signs of stopping even over 25 years later. Its anime has put out over 1,000 episodes so far, and it's on its way to being the single highest selling comic franchise of all time. Its massive success is for a reason. It is a truly incredible story that is absolutely worth the time investment to experience all the way through from start to finish, which is something that I absolutely recommend anyone who has ever considered it to do, and more specifically, I recommend doing so as blindly as possible to ensure that it is as effective as it can be. While unfortunately some things may be spoiled by the osmosis of the internet, I feel the best way to experience One Piece is by trying your best to experience it as close to its purest forms as possible. All that is to say that the game I'm going to be talking about today, One Piece Odyssey, is supplemental material. It's not a replacement for the manga or the anime, and it may not be the best starting point for people who are new to the series, but I'll get into why later. I'm a new One Piece fan, all things considered. Despite growing up in the perfect time to start watching almost immediately, the late 90s and early 2000s, I only really started getting into the anime in 2019, reaching the Alabasta arc, mostly because that's all Netflix had at the time. However, in the years since, I've seen more and more people raving about how good it was, and eventually I decided to bite the bullet and get a Funimation subscription to catch up on what I had missed. A few months after that, I had watched all 1,000 or so episodes that were available and had started reading the manga week to week. So on that note, just a few rapid fire opinions. My favorite arc is Water 7, my favorite Straw Hat is Robin, except during Whole Cake Island where it's Sanji. Sanji is coincidentally my least favorite Straw Hat everywhere else. Doflamingo is my favorite villain, and Wano is too long. So yeah, I'm fully on board with Luffy's wild ride, and when a full, proper JRPG was announced in the One Piece universe, I was really excited. But then I saw who was developing the game and a cold chill shot down my spine. The developers of One Piece Odyssey is ILCA, and to date, their biggest claim to fame was making the worst Pokemon games, well, basically ever, the remakes of Diamond and Pearl. And in an instant, I shot straight down from being excited to being cautious. Now, just because Nintendo made them puke out some awful Pokemon remakes doesn't necessarily mean the developer isn't capable of making a great game. But it really isn't a good look, and while it does make me more skeptical about the overall quality more than I normally would be, I'm still willing to give it a shot because I love this series. So let's set sail for One Piece Odyssey and see just how well the Straw Hats fit into a JRPG format. So the game starts off with a pre-rendered cutscene which introduces the Straw Hats and sets up the general scene. Luffy sees a new island and, being Luffy, immediately decides to check it out. However, they're hit by the knock-up stream, don't ask, it's weird, and they get shot up into the sky. They manage to make their way out of the clouds and plummet directly into the sea. The crew then finds themselves shipwrecked on this new island with the Thousand Sunny mostly sunk. It looks like they won't be leaving for a while, that's for sure. A strange girl takes Luffy's hat and walks off before they wake up. After waking up and regrouping a bit, frozen lightning falls from the sky, which honestly isn't as strange as it sounds for the Grand Line, and while that is interesting, there's other things that need to be taken care of first. Not everyone is here, so Luffy sets off to find the missing Straw Hats, Nami, Zoro, and Brook. It's here on the beach that we first get to take control of Luffy and learn how basic movement works. There's one thing that you'll probably realize right away, one of the most omnipresent problems with the game as a whole, which is how slow running around is. You walk at an absolute snail's pace, and while there is a sprint button to help you move around a little bit faster, it really is only a little faster. It takes forever to get anywhere by walking, and while it was probably a conscious decision by the developers, it just doesn't feel any good. Especially since the run speed and run animations don't feel like they pair up well. The running animations imply a certain speed, but the speed you get from it is just way too low. And unless you're using the auto run feature, which has its own drawbacks, you have to hold a button to keep running at all times, which is really dumb. It should have at least been a toggle or something. Ideally, the game would be patched to allow for faster movement, but as it is, it can be a bit of a struggle to get from place to place, because it feels like it takes so much longer than it really should. Aside from that, the intro here is fine. There's some basic battle tutorials which we'll get into in a little while. We reunite with Zoro and Nami and find out that Brook is taking a bit of a swim. His body is somewhere underwater, which is fine since he's just a skeleton, but he can't find it, so he's just stuck as a soul for the time being. Frankie then decides that he's gonna go and do what he can to get the Sunny back up and running so they can finally leave the island. In the meantime, Luffy still wants his hat back, so the rest of the crew travels further inland where they're attacked by this, the Fire Colossus. This acts as our first boss, and One Piece Odyssey actually does the Metroid Prime thing here, where you get a bit of a taste of the crew at their full potential. Everyone is in the mid-40s for levels, which seems a bit high for an RPG. Of course, that is quickly undone as the girl that took Luffy's hat shows up again and does something to the crew that removes all of their abilities. All of their skills, strength, and even Devil Fruit powers are seemingly gone, or at least everyone has forgotten how to use them. In this state, there's no way they'll be able to beat the Fire Colossus, so with the help of this new character, Audio, they retreat back to his house. It's explained that he and the girl Lim live here on the island named Wofford, and that Lim has the ability to extract power and store them in cubes called memory cubes. Lim thought that the Straw Hats were likely bad people and preemptively took their powers before they could do any harm. So they need to retrieve it in order to properly resume their adventure. After some more tutorials and stuff, Luffy gets the ability to stretch his arms out again, and Audio gives the crew their next goal. The island is being guarded by 4 colossi, and on top of the other trouble they can cause, Audio says they definitely have some of the crew's memory cubes. So they follow him to the first colossus, and this is the game's first dungeon. I really like all of the dungeons that the colossi are held in. I'm a sucker for puzzle solving, and a few of these dungeons have some really fun and interesting puzzles. They remind me a lot of the ones from older JRPGs like Final Fantasy X, and even some of the dungeons from the N64 Zelda games, which is pretty high praise. This first one is beyond basic, and I definitely feel like they could have done a lot more with it, but later ones get far more complex and interesting. They were never the most complex and difficult dungeons I've ever seen or anything, but they got to be challenging enough and I had a ton of fun with them. But it's after we beat this first Colossus that the real meat of One Piece Odyssey opens up, the world of Memoria. See, making a really engaging game in a series like One Piece is really hard to do right. If you try to tell a completely unique story in the franchise's universe, it can come off like fanfiction that just randomly references things that fans know without any proper context to those references. And on the other hand, if you just try to retell the story people already love, you probably won't have a good time with that either, since there's almost no way it would turn out as good. The writers would have to anthologize really important moments, effectively giving just the Cliff's Notes, not having its own voice, and just poorly imitating what it's inspired by. Odyssey actually does something really interesting with its story. Rather than just being a retelling or just being a new story, the manga's writer, Eiichiro Oda, wrote the game story in just a way that gets the best of both worlds. We have this new island of Wofford, we have these new characters of Lim and Audio, both with their own tales to be told throughout the game, but also through Lim's ability, it enables the game to explore older areas and characters from a completely different perspective. Memoria is the world of memory. When Lim takes someone's powers and stores them in cubes, the only way to retrieve those powers is to venture into the world of memory and re-experience those memories. By doing that and reliving their accomplishments within these memories, they will be able to regain their abilities. However, since the world is made of memory, and yeah, memory isn't exactly super reliable, the events experienced in this world is likely going to be very different, for the most part at least. And of course, the enemies the Straw Hats are going to be fighting here in the world of memory are going to be far stronger for reasons. The first place they're going to be revisiting is the first major stop in the Grand Line, Alabasta. Alabasta introduces the players to a lot of the overworld abilities they'll be getting for when they're exploring. Each Straw Hat has their own unique ability that is used for things like puzzle solving, material gathering, and movement. Luffy can stretch out his arms to cross gaps, as well as use his observation hockey to find secrets and see special enemies. Zoro can cut metal blockades and doors and open specific chests. Nami can find money lying around on the ground. Sanji can gather ingredients for cooking. Usopp can use his slingshot to knock things down that are too high to reach otherwise. Chopper is small, so he can fit into paths no one else can. And Robin can find hidden lore out in the world. While I feel the usefulness for these abilities vary, Robin's ability has very little use outside of completion, whereas Sanji's ingredients are always valuable. Overall, I feel like it balances out well in terms of quest usage and other abilities beyond that. While Robin's overworld ability is probably the least useful, her skill while camping is arguably the absolute best. She, Usopp, and Sanji all have things they can do while camping to help out in future battles. Sanji obviously cooks and is the primary source of healing items and buffs in the game. Usopp can craft trick balls, which have various effects like debuffs on enemies, and Robin eventually gets the ability to craft accessories, which is where the vast majority of any one party member's battle stats will come from. Accessories are the game's equipment system, and it's kind of broken. Each Straw Hat gets an accessory grid that slowly grows throughout the game. So instead of there being a strict number of equipment pieces you can equip, you have to fit different accessories of different shapes and sizes together in a way that lets you maximize their effects. That would be fine all on its own, but Robin breaks it by letting you combine accessories together, and not only not losing any efficiency of either of the two fused accessories, often even being able to strengthen them further beyond their original qualities. Some stats like critical hit chance can be increased so much that you can basically crit every attack, and combining that with attack up accessories, you can get absolutely astronomical attacking power. This is really cool and I like doing it, and while it does limit some things by not letting you fuse certain items together, I definitely feel like the game wasn't really designed around people taking any real advantage of it. And I don't even mean things like hardcore min-maxing, just general casual use of the system. I definitely didn't min-max anything with any thought, and I even used the game's auto-equip feature a bunch, but I was able to build out one of my characters into an endgame boss one-shotting machine. Seriously. And with that, I feel like I should start talking about the battle system, because there's a lot to talk about. Odyssey does a lot of things, and it does a lot of them pretty well. However, I feel like there's a few missteps here that prevent the system from achieving its goals while also providing a decent challenge. Odyssey has a pretty familiar looking turn-based battle system, and yeah, people who know JRPGs and have a grasp of how most turn-based battle systems work will get the gist fairly quickly. There's your traditional standard attacks, which get new, more complex animations as the story progresses, tension points or TP as a resource for special attacks, many of which can cause special status conditions like paralysis, freeze, burn, etc. that come with stat debuffs or residual damage, that sort of thing. Allies and enemies take turns attacking each other with a handy gauge on the side of the screen that shows which enemy is going to be attacking next. It's not exactly reinventing the wheel so far. But there are a few things that Odyssey does in particular that are pretty unique and really fun. The first major feature that the battle system has is the fact that each battle is split up into areas, rather than having all four Straw Hats standing in a line together against a bunch of enemies also standing in a line looking at them. What this means is that depending on a few factors, you can effectively treat each area like its own unique battle. Enemies and allies that only have short range attacks will only be able to deal with their own area, and more importantly, won't be able to move to a different area to aid an ally that is in trouble until their area is completely clear of all enemies. That's a really cool idea, forcing you to compartmentalize each area. You can't just have your team laser focus on one dangerous enemy, knowing the attacks from the others will be randomly spread throughout the whole party, nor can you necessarily leave a more frail person to their own devices. If you leave Usopp alone in a group of dangerous enemies, he'll just end up dead. He can't handle it on his own, so you have to strategize on how to clear out areas in smart ways to rally forces where they're needed and keep everyone alive. At least that's the idea, but I feel like there's a few things that kind of sour the experience and makes the battle areas far less important than I feel like they should have been. First is the switching mechanic. When in a battle, you can switch any Straw Hat with any other as long as they haven't moved within a turn. So every single turn, you can swap your entire crew around to gain the highest strategic advantage possible. This is weird since someone can't move from one area to another just on their own, but they can definitely just do that as long as they have someone to swap places with. Swapping crew around ends up being far more advantageous than just moving areas most of the time as well, for a reason I'll get into in a bit, but just as an idea, being able to swap everyone around whenever you want really makes areas feel a lot more connected and less monolithic than I assume was the original intention. Second is the bevy of long-range and all-area attacks there are. To be fair, this is really only a major issue in the late game after the vast majority of the crew's abilities have been regained, but it does end up being a small issue even earlier on. Yeah, the Straw Hats are spread out across a bunch of areas with loads of enemies in each one. Yeah, you could use strategy to properly take out each area, or you could just go to Nami, press Thunder Lance Tempo, and anything that isn't dead is probably either close or paralyzed. Even if you're not using Nami, most Straw Hats have attacks that not only hit any area, but will hit all enemies within it. Of course, Nami isn't always going to be effective, which brings us to the second major idea. This one ripped straight out of the annals of Fire Emblem, a weapon triangle basically. Each Straw Hat has a different type they're associated with, power, technique, or speed. These types all relate to each other in a triangle. Power is good against speed, speed is good against technique, and technique is good against power. This is a huge deal because enemies are all one of these types as well, and not only does your damage increase against a type advantage, but damage taken decreases as well relative to a Ditto. I love this in a vacuum since it effectively makes every Straw Hat viable in some way. Even if, say, Robin isn't as strong as Luffy or Sanji in terms of raw numbers, if all the enemies in a battle are technique or power, she won't take as much damage as they do and will be able to hit harder than them as well. But things kind of go off the rails as soon as you add in the party switching to that dynamic. Suddenly the game ends up feeling like a Pokemon game where not only do you know exactly what Pokemon is being switched in after you KO one, but you have a team of 18, so you are guaranteed a type advantage in every situation. The game tries to account for this a bit since it will mix and match enemy types in different areas, but even then, it doesn't end up mattering much thanks to the aforementioned ranged and multi-area attacks. And I feel like this would be a really quick fix too. Just limit the amount of swapping you can do. If the game was limited to one area swap per turn and one party member swap, it would be a lot more strategic. Of course, that wouldn't stop the massive AoE that everyone is throwing around, so I'd limit that as well. Just taking away Zoro and Sanji's long range attacks would do wonders. That brings me to another issue I have with the game, the character and skill balancing in general. Not necessarily in terms of strength, but more in terms of focus. Now, I'm a Nico Robin fan, and she gets a lot of love in this game for reasons I'll go into later, but to say that she gets left behind in terms of her battling abilities is a bit of an understatement. Just from the first battle with the Fire Colossus, you can kind of see what I mean. Characters like Luffy, Zoro, and even Usopp get like 10 skills they can use in this tutorial battle, but Robin, she gets 4, and she will be stuck with those 4 for the vast majority of the game. And beyond that, she literally only gets 2 more. Zoro ends up with so many different skills that a ton of them end up being redundant, yet Robin doesn't even get anything to really set her apart or give her a proper battling niche. She does get one unique skill which does big damage and can paralyze humanoid men, but it's a single target move that doesn't really work on any boss. So why would I bother using her when I could be using someone who has more options and can deal more consistent damage to bosses? And crazily enough, Robin isn't even the worst example of this. I gotta pour one out for my man the Soul King because yeesh, Brook got done really dirty here. He gets 4 skills, only 2 of which can be upgraded, and you don't even get to use him until chapter 8. Of 9. Now, I get that there may be some limitations in the source material here. Robin only got like a single one-on-one fight in the entire series until last year, well beyond the point where it would be possible to include it in the game, but it still feels wrong. She doesn't even get to snap necks, which is her primary battle tactic in the series, so it's definitely not just a lack of source material. They consciously decided to unevenly hand out skills. Honestly, while I love the look of a ton of these skills, and they were definitely put in the game for fan service first, and as a game design decision second, I feel this inequity hurts every character here. Brook, Robin, and to a lesser extent Frankie are likely to get sidelined by fans since they don't get new skills, whereas the Monster Trio are constantly gaining new, flashier ones by the hour. People looking for a better battling experience will choose the characters with more skills since they have more options for strategy, and fans aiming to look at the cool manga moves animated in 3D will choose the characters with more skills since there's more cool things to look at. Having more skills also means there's going to be inherently more opportunity to optimize and customize those skills, thanks to the memory cubes. These are how your party members will upgrade their skills. Each skill has a few different levels that open up as you beat certain bosses, and you'll need 3 cubes to level them up. These aren't a universal currency, there's a limited amount of cubes for each Straw Hat, and they're spread out throughout the game. Since characters like Zoro and Luffy get huge amounts of different skills, they're going to need far more cubes to fully upgrade them, so these cubes are far more plentiful, especially in the first half of the game. I kind of stopped reading which cubes I was picking up after a while because I'd kind of get annoyed. Oh boy, more cubes for Zoro and Usopp, while Robin and Nami don't even have enough cubes to max out a single attack. It kind of just adds to the rich getting richer snowball effect, and it's pretty unfortunate. On top of leveling up battle skills to do more damage, a few party members like Zoro and Robin will need to use these memory cubes to increase the effectiveness of their overworld skills as well. Zoro won't be able to cut down stronger doors until you put some cubes into the skill, and Robin's accessory fusing ability gets better with more cubes as well. I feel like these skills should have had a different upgrade system than the standard ones, since you can swap cubes about whenever you want, so you can literally always have the best of both worlds, maxed out overworld skills whenever you need them, and maxed out battle skills whenever you need those too. These upgrades should have been tied to side quests or story progression in my opinion, similarly to the bond techniques. Now, I'll get into how these are unlocked a little bit later, but what you need to know for battling is that the party eventually unlocks a bond gauge that has 10 levels. Over time, you can unlock these bond techniques, which, for a set amount of that gauge, will let the party do a new move that is supposed to be super flashy and cool. Combinations of certain Straw Hat's abilities, kind of like the teamwork skills in Bug Fables. However, on top of them typically not even being that strong, like seriously, it's often better to just use regular skills, it'll do more damage. The bond techniques kinda suck. They don't combine abilities in a cool way, like, I don't know, Brook freezing some enemies in place, then Nami electrifying Luffy while he prepares a big punch on the frozen enemies or something like that. It's just a couple of party members doing moves they already have in the game, one after another, while they take turns saying parts of the names of their moves. It's really disappointing since there's so many things I could have done for these, but they decided to do the bare minimum, not only not properly expressing the bond the Straw Hats have, but doing so in a way that is arguably a waste of a turn. More often than not, I completely forgot these existed and I did not miss them. I also forgot about the bond move most of the time. You know how I said that you can't move areas until they've been cleared out? Well, that's actually a lie. You can spend one of your bond points to move from one area to another regardless of how many enemies there are in that area. But I never really ended up using this since you have infinite party switching regardless, and you can just AoE whenever switching won't do what you need. Now, if switching were limited in some way, or if certain party members couldn't switch out, then the bond move would be and is a bit more useful. Unfortunately, these situations are few and far between. Sometimes in battle, something called a dramatic scene will happen. These are battles that have specific scenarios that you need to work through in order to succeed, and sometimes do add a bit more difficulty to the game. These, when the right conditions show up, are my favorite battles to fight since they can limit what switching you do while upping the danger against certain party members. It forces you to think through what you're doing more, clear out areas more quickly, and I even occasionally used bond moves to support my party members who were in trouble. But only a handful of them pop up, and most of the time it's something like, this enemy in Luffy's area that is weak to Luffy is going to do a big move in 10 turns. Hit him once before then. Which is a lot less interesting than I'm sure the developers had hoped. And oh my god, these things give out a lot of experience. Now, I'm not a fan of grinding, which is admittedly an odd quality to have for a fan of JRPGs. But yeah, I typically like when a game respects my time and doesn't force me to fight 100 rats in a row just to be strong enough to survive a single hit from the next boss. One Piece Odyssey, especially thanks to its dramatic scenes, swings really far in the other direction. It's not uncommon in this game to basically be leveling at least one party member up every other battle normally, and there have been times in battles with dramatic scenes where some Straw Hats would get 2 or even 3 levels from a single battle. That is kind of crazy. So I would very frequently avoid overworld battles and only fight what I absolutely needed to, and I still ended up decently over-leveled at the midpoint of the game. Now, I've done a lot of complaining about this battle system, but I want to make myself perfectly clear here. While yes, there are a ton of small problems that can very easily be over-abused to make the game incredibly easy, I still did have a ton of fun using it. It has pretty much everything I want in a good battle system: fun attacks, unique characters, a fun spin on traditional mechanics, stuff like that. And while a few of its less important choices do snowball together to make some bigger problems when you look at it, making the game easy isn't necessarily the same as making the game bad. I've played some games with bad battle systems that actively ruin the experience, and this is definitely not one of them. Yeah, it's not perfect, and if you're playing on PC, you may want to consider the increased difficulty mod, or go after some of the endgame challenge battles, but honestly, if you're just looking for a fun, unique battle system that gives you a nice, breezy experience without a lot of bite, it is a really good one. Or at least I would say that, but against bosses, there's just a random chance your attacks will do nothing, which is the worst decision I've ever seen. I don't care that there's an in-universe explanation for it. I hate it. I hate this game. 0 out of 10. Moving on from that, I want to talk about the presentation, since I really feel like it's one of this game's strongest points. On the audio side, the game does really sound great. The game is mostly fully voiced by the Japanese voice actors, and while I do wish there was English voice acting as well, it is perfectly understandable why that wasn't able to happen. I do like the Japanese voice actors for the most part, so I'm not super bummed, except for Frankie. I really don't think the high-pitched nasally voice fits nearly as well as his English voice, but that really has nothing to do with the game, so let's move on. Motoi Sakuraba was an inspired choice to compose the soundtrack here. He's a veteran JRPG composer writing incredible music for games like Mario Tennis and Everybody's Golf. All joking aside, he's composed for the Tales of series, Dark Souls, Baten Kaitos, and more, and his music here is just as good as anything else he's ever done. Area tracks like Water 7 Lower Coast Day, and Dressrosa Day, really do a great job of setting the mood for Water 7's relative peace and Dressrosa's relative chaos. And the battle themes like Alabasta Boss, and Marineford Boss, are really great and make these encounters exciting and fun to take on. And finally, let's talk about the visual presentation. I said earlier that the slow movement was probably a conscious decision, and I think this is why. They want you moving slowly because they want you to spend as much time as possible looking at all of these environments as much as possible. This game is gorgeous. Obviously, it's not the most technically demanding game out there. It's not pushing hardware to its limits with ray tracing or anything, but it does an incredible job of representing the One Piece world with careful stylization and bright, vivid color palettes that pop out of the screen. The Straw Hats themselves are all modeled so well, with each one being a perfect representation of their 2D drawings. Now, for preference, I'm using some of the DLC costumes that came with the deluxe edition, namely for Nami, Soga King, and Chopper, but despite liking their post-time skip designs a little bit less, they're still really good here. Other characters have just as much care put into them. Even the nameless mooks that make up a lot of the enemies are well designed and fun, fitting really well into the One Piece world. But as good as the characters look, I think the environments are even better. One Piece is already full of gorgeous landscapes and architectures, and they've all been recreated with incredible care and detail. In my opinion, it peaks at Water 7, which is an incredible city built out of the ocean with canals flowing all around, fed by a giant fountain at the city's peak. While the actual explorable areas are obviously limited, what's here is beautiful, and it looking this good is a big reason I love exploring exploring so much. Even the UI is great to look at. Good looking UI and menus are a really big thing in a game like this, and Odyssey really delivers. Now, it's not the best UI in the world. It can be a little bit clunky to navigate certain menus because of how they chose to have them control, but on a scale from 1 to Persona 5, it's pretty solid, and it was more of a help than a hindrance for the game as a whole. Even with the abysmal running speed, exploring around the worlds of Memory and Wofford itself is quite fun, and on top of the visuals, that's largely due to how much stuff there is to do while you're doing that exploring. As you explore in Memoria, you'll come across these strange rifts, which Lim calls hysterias. These are special little side stories that star a few specific team members, and this is how you unlock the aforementioned bond techniques. While I honestly didn't care about the new attacks at all, I did like going through these because they were always nice little stories that involved a lot of banter between a small set of the Straw Hat Pirates, which is always great. On top of the hysterias, there are dozens of side quests to do, chests to find, and bounties to hunt, which are basically a bunch of optional mini-bosses. The game even has a bunch of in-game objectives that you can clear, all of which will give you little bonuses for the team, be that materials, accessories, money, whatever. For the most part, the side quests here end up being fairly bog standard for JRPGs, fight these guys, get these MacGuffins, bring this here, that sort of thing. But there are a few here that I really did enjoy, and they are all optional, so if you aren't a side questy sort of person, you don't have to do any of them. And if you do want to go back through previous areas for these side quests, it ends up being fairly simple, as there's a fast travel system which can take you to specific important areas or landmarks in each major town. Now, with all that out of the way, I think it's about time we head back towards the story, because there's a lot here to talk about and I have a few bones to pick. So if you want to skip, here's the timestamp somewhere over here, and if you aren't caught up with One Piece, at least past the time skip, I absolutely would recommend you skipping. Anyways, here we go. Alright, so first things first, I may as well talk about the bone I have to pick. One Piece Odyssey does a fantastic job of retelling important arcs while avoiding spoiling too many important details about the story for the most part. Alabasta, Water 7, and to an extent Dressrosa are effectively completely different stories, just told in the same place as the original with a few small references to the original events, which I think is the perfect way to do this sort of thing. It lets established fans go through this sort of bizarro world alternate universe story in a setting they love, and lets fans get the gist of what happened in an arc while still being able to go through the original and not have major events completely spelled out for them. I kind of wish the Water 7 bit didn't so directly talk about its two major plot lines, but at least most of the details had to change with different scenarios and setups, but aside from that, it was mostly fine. Where I start to have an issue, and the point where it kind of makes it hard for me to recommend the game to people who are new to the series, or more accurately, haven't reached the time skip in One Piece, is thanks to the Marineford Memoria. Let me be perfectly clear, this is a really cool chapter despite only being like 45 minutes long for people who have already experienced Marineford in its entirety. But Marineford arguably has the single most important single event in the entire series, Ace's death at Sakazuki's hand, and having that moment spoiled at all is kind of a deal breaker in my opinion. I'm honestly not the biggest anti-spoilery guy in the world, but it's different with something like this, you know what I mean? I kind of wish they sidestepped this event in general, or even skipped Marineford in its entirety, since all that happens here is a boss gauntlet and Ace's death. Admittedly, there is something that affects the Wofford plot at the very end as well, so we might as well get into that. So up to this point, Adio, who is definitely not the villain, absolutely not, has been altruistically helping the Straw Hats reach various colossi, which is, again, entirely for their own benefit, not his. I mean, the colossi have the crew's memory cubes, and he obviously just wants to help out because he's a good guy. And it definitely does come across like that for a while. None of the crew is suspicious as to why he's helping them do this very specific thing, and they just go about their business. So after going through the Alabasta, Water 7, and Marineford Memorias and beating some more colossi, the Straw Hats decide that it's finally time to save Brook. So Sanji finds some ingredients to make some pop to power Frankie's gadgets, don't ask. After finding Brook's body, which actually floated up to the surface somehow, the group gets ambushed by the Fire Colossus and defeats it. And it's here that we get the completely unsurprising twist that Audio, the guy who was definitely not the villain, was actually the villain, and is planning on killing the Straw Hats now that they've beaten all the Colossi for him and freed the Divine Breath. Listen, I like Audio as a villain, he's fine. He's as deep as you'd expect from any other minor One Piece villain, which is to say that he's far deeper and more interesting than most villains from other media, but in this scenario, he's really just fine. His heel turn isn't as big of a twist as I think the game wanted, and while he does have depth, in the wide world of One Piece villains, his motivations and plans really don't stand out. He's just a member of another oppressed people that the world government wants to get rid of, and he's using another ancient forgotten weapon to take revenge. The only somewhat shocking bit is that he's been abusing Lim's trust to do it. After going through the Dressrosa Memoria, Lim reveals something that she'd been keeping secret. When she took the crew's powers at the beginning of the adventure, it's not because she was afraid that the Straw Hats were bad, it was at Audio's request because she wanted to help her friend achieve his dream, which at that point she thought was to destroy the Divine Breath and free Wofford so he could have his people move back to their ancestral home. She didn't know that he was attempting to keep the Straw Hats weak while also using them to gain access to the Divine Breath. Audio was her only friend, her only family, so of course she was going to help him over these strange pirates that she just met and never doubted his motivations. After this little confrontation and explaining what she can about the Divine Breath and Wofford, she disappears, leaving the Straw Hats trapped in the gateway between reality and Memoria. Now, Luffy brings everyone back to reality the only way he knows how, by punching things, but of course things are getting worse as the world government has noticed that the Divine Breath is free and has sent the Marines to perform a buster call, a complete eradication of Wofford and everything on it. With no other options, it's time for the Straw Hats to confront Audio about his betrayal, so they head into the Sky Tower, the game's final dungeon. After about 8 hours of side questing, but let's not worry about that. The Sky Tower is a really cool place, a weird mix of reality and the cube-based landscapes of Memoria. There's a bit of a boss gauntlet here, but more importantly, after reaching a roadblock, the crew needs to head back into Memoria to solve a puzzle, and it's Robin's time to shine. Now, I feel in terms of their characterization, all of the Straw Hats are in full form here, but it's really Robin that breaks out and becomes the star player. Wofford is a mysterious island with a rich history that needs to be uncovered, and that's what Robin loves doing the most. A lot of really cool stuff is uncovered about the island throughout the game, and Robin is the key to finding it all out. It's really cool to see her take center stage, which is really something that pretty much never happens in the actual series. Lim is also a pretty great character who starts off pretty aloof and distrusting of the Straw Hats, but over time, seeing what they're like and how they do things through Memoria, grows to like and care about them. Of course, she's a kid, so she gets embarrassed quickly and gets defensive about a lot of things very easily, but she manages to be a kid character that I ended up actually liking, which is not something I can say for a lot of others. After going through Memoria again to search for clues on the barrier, the crew discovers that it's actually sheet music, a song written to praise the Divine Breath. Brook is able to play the song with ease and clears the blockade, allowing the crew to head further up the tower. They confront Audio, who has definitely given up the whole happy-go-lucky explorer friend deal. He shoots Lim and takes the Divine Breath out to cause mayhem. Lim, strangely, turns into a cube, which is only possible if the Lim the crew knew was created by someone else. But there's no time to think about that. Audio is still on the loose with the Divine Breath. Audio and the Divine Breath act as the final boss. First it's Audio, and second the Divine Breath on its own. This was the only fight in the game that really gave me any trouble, at least after accessory crafting was unlocked. And it's a pretty good one. The big robot fish will summon weather robots to cause storms in every area each turn, which can all attack the crew. On top of that, the Divine Breath itself can attack as well, and it hits pretty hard. The fight took me about 15 minutes, and it was pretty fun. Once the Divine Breath goes down, all that's left is one final clash between Luffy and Audio for the Sunny and the ability to leave the island alive. It's here that we learn more about what drove Audio to do what he did. He was traveling with his brother Pororoka while searching for a way to return his clan to Wofford, their ancestral home. However, his brother was working with the world government and was going to sacrifice Audio for his own benefit. This backfired, and Pororoka was instead executed after Audio escaped, which brung about his plan to use the Divine Breath to take revenge on the government for manipulating them. After the clash, a pod on the island opens, revealing Lim, or someone that looks like her. It turns out that this is the real Lim, the Divine Breath's guardian, who attempted to take control of the Divine Breath from Audio during the fight with the Straw Hats, letting them succeed. Audio, not giving up on his fight against the government, takes the remnants of the Divine Breath and heads off alone to keep fighting for his dream. Lim, the real Lim, is able to use her power to awaken the cube Lim had been trapped in, awakening her again. This is kind of weird because now there's just two different Lims hanging around, the only real difference being their eye color. Of course, our Lim acts a lot differently thanks to her experiences with the Straw Hats, which is a nice touch. And now that everything is done, all that's left to do is have a party, then gather the crew together and keep going on their journey through the Grand Line. With one final goodbye to the Lims, the Straw Hats head off to their next adventure. Smoker then arrives a short time later, only to keep everything they find a secret from the government. He's a good guy, that Smoker. And that was One Piece Odyssey. Even now, as I write this script, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about the game. Yeah, it's got some incredible moments, and as a fan of One Piece, I adored going through these older locations and story moments, and loved getting new interactions between the Straw Hats and a new uncharted land. But on the other hand, the gameplay kind of suffers a death of 1,000 cuts in a way. Almost none of the issues I have with the game, the exploration, the battle system, whatever, are completely game-breaking, nor do they cause a lot of frustration. But since there are so many small issues, and they all tend to piggyback on each other to create something a bit more substantive, they tend to stick out a bit more. I really did enjoy my time playing it. I think that fundamentally the battle system is filled to the brim with some really cool ideas and concepts. It's just balanced in a really awkward way, and the developers tended to focus on including as much fan service and spectacle in it as possible rather than making sure it was a properly balanced system, which kinda led to it not being as fully realized as it could have been. If they were to strip back some of the characters' abilities so they were more evenly gifted with skills, exploration would be more rewarding since you'd be able to evenly upgrade and use people by exploring. If they were able to give them more well-developed battle niches, there could be a lot less reliance on big nuclear attacks, and it could let each Straw Hat carve their own identities in battle a bit more. And if they were to restrict things like the swapping mechanic to force players to properly interact with the separate areas more, this could easily be one of my favorite turn-based battle systems. But as it is, it's just good. I did have a ton of fun using it, but the more you use the system and the more you master it, the more the game simply can't keep up with the monster it lets you create. One Piece Odyssey definitely isn't the most incredible JRPG experience I've ever had. It's no Persona 5, Xenoblade Chronicles, or Dragon Quest XI. But as a One Piece fan on top of a JRPG nerd, I absolutely left the experience completely satisfied, and I am definitely going to go back for a second playthrough eventually. If you are a One Piece fan looking for a game that will let you be in the world of One Piece for a while, this is definitely the experience you're looking for. And despite not being the absolute best starting point for people who want a taste of what One Piece is, but want the ability to go into the series proper blind, if you do want to dip your toes and aren't afraid of a few spoilers, you will get a fairly representative experience of how great One Piece can be. And like I said at the beginning of the video, it's absolutely a trip worth taking. Thank you all very much for watching. Now I just hope my channel doesn't get completely obliterated by Toei Animation. See you later.